Recording. Okay, welcome everyone. Thanks for your patience. As you can probably see and tell, we're trying to navigate our way around this new world, this new technology, and do our first live interactive webinar here at NorCal. My name's David Robertson. I'm the Coach Education Coordinator. I'm on this as a panelist along with Andy Ferrant, our Director of Operations, and our main presenter, or the presenter, keynote is Benjamin Ziemer. I'm sure you all know our NorCal president. So Benjamin is going to set the bar high for the rest of us. This is the first in a series of panel discussions. We thank you for joining. We have almost 300 people on in this webinar. So that's a great response, and I believe there's more joining as we go. This will be recorded for your reference. And to go back, in terms of the sort of logistics and how it runs, everyone's going to be by default on mute. We will use the Q&A for question and answer as opposed to the chat, so please make sure we're using the Q&A. Benjamin will obviously, he's presenting. As he's presenting, I will try and flag some questions that perhaps pertain to the larger audience. We probably won't get through all of them, but maybe I speak for Benjamin and say that I know he will get back to other people. Maybe we don't get to your questions. I'm sure he'll take the time offline to address anything that we haven't covered. So without much further ado, I'm going to pass you over to Benjamin Ziemer, our NorCal president, and he will explain what he's going to cover. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Here is the title and the focus. Let me remove this. And forgive me, this is my first Zoom webinar. But we are focusing on technical planning, and especially I want to make this very practical for clubs, knowing, and I think it's important to give a little bit of an idea of where I come from. I've been a director of coaching a long time ago with Roanoke Park Express. I've worked in a club in Marin. I've worked at Santa Rosa United, Sac Republic, and then worked with a lot of different clubs in different manners, mostly through Ziemer Brothers Soccer at the time. I've worked with the U.S. national team, under 14 and under 15 boys, the 98 and 99s, and with the ID2 team. And so there's a lot of situations you have to plan for in all various situations need planning. But my main focus is trying to make this as practical as possible for everyone, because I just know the reality of club soccer and different levels of club soccer. So this is all based on the idea that the player is the project. And I'm sorry, let me back up. The other thing is this is for clubs training at least 3 days a week. If you are not training 3 days a week, not a problem. You should stay on. It'll be informational and you can adjust it. But I'm basing everything on 3 to 4 to even 5 times a week, if not days a week, but clubs of that level. So most clubs of that level have an idea of play, and they talk about player development. So there's planning step by step that's needed in order to develop a player. Of course, soccer is a team sport, and many of our clubs, a team is important as well. But this is the idea, that it's the step-by-step planning for a player and then eventually a team. Why plan? Well, there's, I think it's a question that you need to ask yourself if you're in a club that wants to have a plan or not, but there are many reasons for planning. The first is it gives you, and you can see here, an idea of how to do something, a method of doing something. So for instance, you can plan your halftime talk, you can plan a pregame, you can plan a training, you can plan your meetings. But having a plan for anything is obviously helps you utilize your time in the best way possible. And when you really look at it, the amount of hours that you have with the player and with the team, I know when I coach, I feel like the time is fleeting and I want to squeeze every part of a training or a time that the players at the club as possible. So planning defined is the process of deciding in detail how to do something before actually starting to do it. So, again, an act of formulating a program for a definite course of action. So it's something that and I'm coming at or presenting this with the knowledge that there are many people out there, many clubs, and people that are probably planning at a higher level than I have done, or they already have a plan in place. And so the focus here for me is just to share different scenarios, some of the stuff that I have done and what I found has worked. So it's not the way, it's just a way or several ways. So I've found the keys to planning over time and the long-term approach to developing a club methodology. You'll see some examples of most recently with Sac Republic. The way that I worked when I first went in, we were a brand new club, and Rod Underwood, who was the director at the time, at first allowed us to plan our teams and our trainings the way we wanted, but over time we all came into one form of planning. And so you can see the evolution of it. But having just attended the La Liga course in Spain, they recommend that you give yourself 5 years to developing a methodology. Some of the keys I found over time, my first club, I was 27 at the time. I hired someone to do to use FileMaker Pro. And I created this planning program with a curriculum that was just way too complicated. And I found it buckled under the weight of the complication. It was way too difficult to implement. It was way too centralized in, I had to put or hire somebody to put all the data into a file. And so I learned at that time that you have to decentralize where the information is coming from. You have to keep it simple to track, simple to implement, simple to track, and simple to evaluate the results. So basically, the bottom line is keep it simple, and especially in our environment. If you're the San Jose Earthquakes and you have millions of dollars to spend on youth development, then that's one thing. But Real Madrid, Barcelona are a different situation than many of us, or most of us, or all of us. So the technical planning that I'll address tonight is the club, the team, players, and then there should be technical planning for coaches. And this was a big message that we got at La Liga level, and any club that we visited worldwide or had presented here, they have a plan for coaches, but I'm not going to go into this tonight. So the club project planning, we have technical projects and just sort of putting down some of the things that where a club might have to develop a project. One is your philosophy, game model, methodology, season planning, staff development, and then the tools that you use. So here's an example of some of the things, and this is now what we're working on, or I'm working on to present and work with the technical committee, the NorCal, but we're going into all these sort of things, such as, well, why soccer? Somebody asked at one point, why soccer, and why not baseball? Why not basketball or other sports? And so for me, it's just a natural, of course it's soccer, but I think it's something that perhaps you can define. But specialization, you should have and this is all part of planning. When are you going to have this dialogue of, do you encourage specialization, and at what ages? Competition, what type, at what ages, what number of players, what field size, do you, number of games, number of trainings, number of events, what sort of events, tryout selection, at what age, philosophy of teaching and coaching. Right now there's a debate on play, practice, play, repetition without a defender, technical repetition without a defender. There's a big discussion worldwide going on concerning that, or a combination of both. But every club that wants to work in a serious manner needs to define these things for their club, and then ensure that their coaches are following it. Playing time. There are some clubs that guaranteed 50% playing time. There are some that guarantee it up to an age. Training philosophy, playing at home, planning. Club identity. You can just see on the left all the things that a club could discuss, decide, and many clubs actually have a lot of this, but these are all the areas that we thought could be developed. Okay, and then back to then you have the game model. I'll go a little bit into that before we move on. So game model, you actually might as a club decide whether or not you need one. And so this is something where Real Madrid doesn't have a fixed game model for their club. They allow they hire quality coaches who know what they're doing, and they allow them a degree of flexibility. Fiorentina, when the professor was there, they would look at the age group of the players and the quality of the playing pool per age group, and they might say, okay, we have very good wingers, so we're going to play a 4-3-3, or we have more strong midfielders, so we're going to play a 3-5-2. But they weren't fixed on one model, whereas Barcelona is fixed on one model, and they don't want a plan B. At which ages do you have a game model? At which ages is it important? And the Spanish think that there should be flexibility in the game model. Kids should be have a lot of variety early on, and then later on around 14, 15 start to hone in on a game model. So these are things that you could discuss with your club, and part of your club planning is, okay, what are the projects we want to have? Philosophy, a game model, then a methodology, which is probably the most difficult thing. But these are the things you have to decide. System, fundamentals of the game, or not decide you're not going to do this, allow every coach to do it, but at least think about it and make a decision. So you can see philosophy, some clubs have an open game model, some have a closed. Open being that they let coaches adjust during a game or during a part of the season or do what they want. Closed is come hell or high water, this is what we do, no adapting, and that's the Barca model. And then there are the points that you have to cover. I've put in I have my game model that I've developed over years, and so I have it in, and then eventually I was going to put in Bilbao and other people just to see. So that's where I'm at in my game model. So this is something, who decides? And before I had decide, and Ian Mork and I spoke just before this and put instead, who decides? What is your planning philosophy? So are you going to plan from the top down, from the bottom up? Or is it going to be collaborative? Are you a type of director that will say, no, this is what you do, and if you don't like it, go work somewhere else, or if you want to work here, this is what you're going to follow? You have to define the planning areas, planning tools, planning timeline, meetings, and oversight. So this is for your season or on an annual basis. You always keep in mind the long-term approach to player development, and keeping it simple to track, implement, and evaluate.
Benjamin, I don't know if this is an appropriate time for a question, but one just popped in. Do you want to take it now? Alfredo Rocha said, I see mission, vision, and values in the overview. How important is it to get that in place first before diving into planning?
I think it's probably the first thing you start with. And it's almost every presentation from every club that I've been at is they start with the values. Because if the value, for instance, if the mission of the club is just to provide football as a recreation, and the values are just to have enjoyment and keep kids playing as long as possible, then what follows, the planning and the methodology will be in line with that. But if the mission is to develop players for the highest level, and I'll give you Fiorentina as an example, or Italian professional clubs, when we did our first coaching education tour over there, we watched drills and we had a long discussion and said, in the United States, the players wouldn't do this. But in the end, they would do it only at the highest clubs. The most motivated, driven players would do it. And that's what we were visiting. So it was at Atalanta where they did one drill for an hour. Well, Atalanta lives off of youth development and players developing into first team players, and then they sell them. And so if that's the vision of the club, is to develop youth players for the first team, then everything follows in line with that. And they don't mind that they squeeze a player so hard that they might lose a bunch, and they know the ones that remain in this incredibly tough environment are going to be the ones that are hardened for a first team. So I think it's important. Sorry, I skipped. Let me go back. The team planning areas. And so basically the technical events, I call them, are the trainings, games, tournament showcases, training camps or team building events, and then homework, individual plan. The areas you have to always consider are the technical, tactical, personality, physical. Those are common throughout soccer. And then I put the considerations over here, and I don't know if this is always the age of player. So you can have a perfect scenario in mind, but none of us work in a perfect scenario. So I know even the professional clubs in our area, their youth academies, the San Jose Earthquakes, train, they lift at one, then they train at another site. So they have to take that in consideration when they're doing their planning. And some Fiorentina, for instance, they trained at 4 different training sites in Florence. This is a professional club with a $150 million budget, and they didn't even have one training site for everyone. So they had to take that consideration to all of their planning. So the other things are age of players and teams, level of players and teams. If you have players that, again, just want recreational football, then you probably plan a little bit less, or you aren't as concerned about some of the details. Number of players. This is not until I was at Sac Republic in club soccer did I know concretely every day how many kids I would have at training, and how much better or easier it is to do planning when you absolutely know the number of players you have. Makes a big difference. The time of the year or the day of the week. So you could be entering a time that you've finished, I don't know, for instance, in the fall, you finished State Cup and you finished your fall league, but you're going to train for another 2 weeks. Well, you might change your planning and make it more something like fun, enjoyment around football. So you might go into a game phase where you're more open in your coaching and allow players to develop their creativity and do a lot of training through games. And recognize the time of the year it is. In my German course, they called it Spaß am Football. And there's a rhythm to a season. There's a preparation, which is preseason. Then there's the bulk of your season. And then there's sort of the end where they hit a point where kids are getting tired. They're nearing needing a break. And so you might change the way you work. And then, of course, I should have put in weather. We were once at Fiorentina where it poured all day, and they didn't cancel training. They just changed what they did because it was a dirt field covered in water. So they couldn't play on the ground. So instead they did training heading for almost 2 hours. And that video is actually, I think it's up online, but it was amazing. They kept doing, they did train, but they adapted to what they did based on the weather. Amount of space. You might have a time that you show up and I don't know, one of the fields has been booked by somebody else and there's been an error in something. So you might have to change your amount of space. You might have 12 teams on one field, and it's very easy to actually run training 12 teams on one field. It may not be ideal, but a good coach could certainly use a 20 by 30 space and come up with a good training. And then coaching schedules are something that are very, all of us, if we have coaches coaching multiple teams, you have to work around their schedule. So that may mess up some of the training, especially if you want to do age group trainings. And then obviously equipment or number of goals. And I used to always, if there's a goal, I try and use it. And I think it's something that if as soon as you can, get a goal involved in your training. And then always thinking of technique, tactical, personality, physical. Individual player development plan. So this is something that I'm going to give an example. And this is something I developed with Hugo Perez for the US 98 and 99 national team. And I'm just going to briefly, and I'll share this with people once I take off all the US soccer stuff. I don't mind sharing it because I actually developed it. So it's not their property, it's mine. But I couldn't figure out how to change the template. But you can see first we just went through and said, okay, why? Or what are the areas, the national team program? It's kind of identifying, okay. So our thing was this, that we wanted to assist player development in the national team programs. So we wanted to have them here develop a multi-year individual training plan program. and combining individual training in the club. We thought that when they went back to their clubs, the biggest challenge was reaching the level that they reached at national teams. And so we knew they were motivated players. And so these are some of the things that we did. So this is something that just an example for you as a club. And I know many of you might have it, or some of you have it, but you basically identify what you want. And then at the end, you develop the plan for it. So if you're a professional club or a high level club that's trying to develop players for professional soccer, college soccer, national team, then you have to work at a higher level than for recreation. So we actually looked at, this was all very interesting, the grades in school, social behavior. We asked about their parents' information because it was very interesting to us to know. We asked who actually made their lunch or made breakfast for them, who was home when they got home. And so these are all interesting things. And then you go into the technical components. And these are things you can find almost anywhere. And again, we'll share this. And that's for individual planning. The areas being technical, tactical, personality, physical, and other. So, and then here's just a couple evaluations. It could be as simple as this. And I think most or many clubs have an evaluation. This is actually of a player that's now just made his first national team appearance from Colorado Rapids, and his evaluation at the time. And this was US Soccer's evaluation at the time that they wanted us to use. Okay, and then here's, and I think, I don't know if I can share this, but I can share this, and this is, whoops, I shouldn't have that in there. This is an evaluation I've used. It's based off of Ajax, Amsterdam from years ago, and I've just sort of over the years gone further. And this one, we don't have some of the physical attributes like psychomotor skills and coordination ability because of the age that we were working, but you could add these things in. So that would be a way to plan your individual player development plan. There's self-scans, which we'll put in an example of a self-scan where the players evaluate themselves. The only one I could find was one that we used from or created for Sac Republic, and I didn't feel comfortable sharing it right now, but I know I have one somewhere. But a self-scan where the players evaluate themselves, and then you meet with them and their parents, decide upon a 1 to 4 year plan, and then you have to come up with a way of testing or tracking. And some are simple, some aren't, and you can make it as simple as you want and as complex as you want. And always a consideration of the age and players of the team, level of the players and the team, and then the time of the year or the day of the week. Because you may not, in certain times of the year, you may tell them, we don't want you training on your own because we're in a period where we're playing so much, or we want you to be limited in that regard. So the typical, the technical planning choices, these aren't all of them, but this is just what I have examples of, so I thought would be good to show. So here's an example of very simple yearly view. So, and I think this is something that almost anyone that is accepting a paycheck in soccer, and I know many people are, should be doing at least something like this. And you can do this on a Google and Google Docs. You can have a file for a team that the DOC can have access to, the coach has access to, or any person overseeing that team. And you just ask them, you give them this template, which we'll share these templates with everyone. And because this has been shared, the foundation of this came from Fiorentina. And then from that, we've developed them. But you can literally go through, and this just gives you a very good overview of everything. And so here it's not defined, but you'll see later where all this stuff is defined, number of trainings, total games, and then you can define what sort of games. But I found this very helpful for giving me an overview of a season. And then we'll go deeper into it afterwards. Okay, and then here's
Benjamin, do you want to take a couple of questions at this point, or do you want to save that in? Okay.
Yeah.
Benjamin, in your planning, Kevin Kilroy, in your planning, do you estimate or track players' loads? If so, how do you do this?
Yeah, you know what? With Sac Republic, absolutely. But we had heart rate monitors. We had somebody responsible for sports performance. But I think it's probably one of the more difficult things to do in sort of the competitive club soccer environment, because you don't have the support. It's very easy when you have somebody that's spitting out, every morning with Sac Republic first team, or every evening, we got the data from the day. We actually had a guy on the sideline with an iPad tracking the player's load during that time. So then absolutely, if you have the tools, you should at least have a feeling what you should be doing each day of the week according to what you did the previous weekend. And you should at least have a feeling for what should be done every day, because there is science about, the day before training, you shouldn't work on, or before a game on a Friday, you shouldn't do endurance training. So you should be aware of what sort of physical load you're going to put the players under on that day. So absolutely, you should, but your limit's going to be what you can do, or what tools you have. And most of the time, it's the fingertips. So as you become more experienced, I could almost, and not in any way bragging, but just showing what experience is, I could almost always, I had a feeling for when we were reaching a load, and I would go over to our sports performance guy, or he'd come out, and I could tell, and you just know, there's a lot of experienced coaches here that have the same ability. Over time, you develop a feeling for it. You can see the player's physical state, and often that will tell you a lot. And in addition, you learn, especially when you have somebody programming, or when you have an idea of what an IAX triangle passing drill, the sort of workload that it creates. And so then is all you have to do is know the size, and the intensity should most time be pretty high, in my opinion. But then the workload it's putting on them. But that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, in working in a club that doesn't have all the tools like a professional club has, is that aspect of it. Anything else, Robo? Mother?
Yeah, there's a few more. I could ask one more, and we can save
Okay.
more towards the end, but one more because it's pretty fresh. Robert Robinson asked, how often should the evaluations be done? I think he's referencing your player evaluation you showed.
I think it's up to the club, and it depends how serious you are. So I think player evaluation is constant. You're always evaluating and looking at them, and it's the Fingerspitzgefühl, they say in Germany, like the feeling from your fingers. Generally, at most clubs I've worked at, it's been twice a year. At the Republic, I believe it was 3 times a year. So, but it's, that you start the season. Maybe if you start your season, you have a summer season, maybe you give a verbal evaluation then. At the end of fall, you might give a written evaluation. At the middle of spring, I always like to give an idea, and we try to, with the Republic, an idea of what they needed to work on in order to remain in the club, or if they were, going to be back in the club. So I think you have to read it as a club. How much are they paid? Are they full time? How many teams are they coaching? I think that's sort of a club by club thing. Move on.
Yes, move on. There's a few
All right.
more. We'll flag them for later.
Okay.
Thanks.
So here's tactical periodization, and just this is an example. So here's starting with the annual. This was my annual for the first year. This is July 15th to August 15th to the 16th, the way I broke down the Sac Republic training. So this was my overview of the entire season. I knew how many cycles I had. how many months, how many trainings. I needed 75 games to get every player 35 games. It's one of the drawback of the academy is you can't play in tournaments. And so I had to set up a lot of friendlies, but I knew that players of that age, and that wasn't enough, to be honest with you. At the age I was coaching U18s at the time, I think they should have more. So I knew that I had 3 6-week cycles, then a winter break of 4 weeks. I knew everything about it. So from there, this was my starting point, and this is tactical periodization. This is taken from Renato, from Benfica. And so this is the way I started. And here are the, in fact, here it is. This is this was my guide at first, because I wasn't experienced. I had worked in tactical periodization, but I wasn't for the principle sort of stuff. So this is sort of the compass of what you're supposed to do on each day according to it. And then this was actually, I believe, my first 2 weeks of training. So my very first training for Sac Republic, I just knew these players. They came from, I think, 11 different clubs, 22 different players. And I started with passing in twos, passing and receiving. And I already knew from experience that they were going to have flaws in their fundamental biomechanical part of passing and receiving, the way they held their foot, where they landed on. So I already knew that. So I started with that. I corrected it. I went into triangle passing, and then I went into possession, and then I went into 11v11. My plan was to, down here, was to the way of playing. I used the very first day to show the way of playing, and it was very controlled. And then you can just see this is the way that that I organized it at first. Okay, but then as you watch over time, and let me see if I have it here, it changed. That I'll go into later. So by the end, it was a lot different. And so that's one of the things is if you're just starting this, don't kill yourself by having it perfect. And we've done that a lot, or I've done that a lot. If it's not perfect, even this presentation, this is the first one. And so it will get better, and we'll all be better as we do more and more of them. But don't let perfect get in the way of starting. The main thing is just to start, and then you can adapt. And it might be after 2 years you say, all right, this is a great planning file. And I'll show you some other ways here. So this is the end of my first season, the way that we evolved. And we went from what I did at first, which was this. And this is without any oversight from Rod Underwood, who was our DOC, our director of coaching. And we were brand new. We started. So we were at a similar point that if you're starting now. And then, I don't know where that one went. And I have a bunch of different. So this is what we ended up with. This was our final. So this was week 34, but it was week 2 for me of this working in this way. And I found this to be very effective. It's just simple. And I'll share this with everyone. So you just had the theme. And this is at the, week 34 that's quite a few weeks in. But is all we had to do every week, we had to turn this into him. It had to be to him by our staff meeting on Monday. And so I just went through the theme, the technical, the tactical, the physical, psychological, space that we needed, complexity, number of exercises, intensity, number of players, duration of session. So that's another, just a simple way of working that I found very effective.
Benjamin, couple of quick questions that pertain to that. Couple of people have asking, how do you adjust, modify, adapt to periodization in case of unforeseen changes in the season? That a question similar by Roberto Moro is, how do you adapt based on number of kids showing up? You have all the variables in place.
Experience. I mean, you have to,
Sorry, the question, do you throw the plan out for the day? I think was the
It depends. It depends. If you want to work on something that's team tactical and you don't have enough players, then you're going to have to. But if your goal is to work on maintaining possession, and you know that you're going to do passing and receiving, you might have to change your drills. but generally you can do something. If you're going to work on positional play and you planned on doing a 8 versus 6, but you only have 12 players, then you have to adapt and change it. So then maybe it'll be 7 versus 5. If you wanted to use goalkeepers in front of the goal, but you don't have a goal, then you have to change, and you don't have the keepers at the end of the drill or at the end of the grids. If you want to work on shooting, you don't have a goal, then that's a challenge. But I've done it. You shoot on bags and make them score on the ground. Find a fence. If you're on a turf field and there's a fence, turn your training so the ball has to strike below the fence line. And if the players, you want to work on shooting, you don't have a goal, then they hit the fence. If it goes over the fence, that player has to immediately run and get the ball. So that you certainly can adjust on the fly. And that's the reality that we face that isn't the reality of all these people that come over and present to us, the professional clubs, because they know every single day who's going to be there. So these are the challenges that I think actually make us better coaches.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so here's planning training in 4 stages. And so this is the way that I think of a training, which is pre-training. When the player arrives, what are they going to do? I have times where we say nothing. They don't do any, they get to do whatever they want, but they understand that around the field, there's a level of seriousness. So I call it locker room time. And recognizing in most of the world, a kid comes to the club and they go into the clubhouse, they hang out, they change, first they might go and get a snack. Then they go into the clubhouse and they're changing into their training gear and they're shooting the breeze and they're having fun and messing around. And some of the best time as a player is, around the clubhouse and that social time you get. So if you don't have that, then set it up and where you have players come. And have your locker room time if you want, or you have a pre-training program. And this is something like Mikey Varas, who's now at FC Dallas with the first team, is an assistant coach. He was incredibly efficient with pre-training. He was incredibly detailed, and you can see the players benefited tremendously. He also had periods where he just let them come. He was good at reading the mood of the players or the time we were in the season and whether or not it was necessary. But you could have a little dribbling drill. You can have them show up and juggle. You can have a lot of people do rondo. So that's the pre-training. Warm up is sort of the time to activate, get them focused, to bring them into the green and say, okay, I'm very loose off the field. And I like to joke and have a good time. But once the players step into the field, they knew, get to work. And they enjoyed the getting to work. And so the warm up is a time of sharpening, of getting them ready to actually train. And I know there's a lot of integration of the physical and the technical into the warm up, but you're not going to go strike long balls when you're not warm. And so there has to be, especially as you get older, there has to be a focused warm up time. I put in here in between, if you're not careful, and this kills me because training is absolutely, you have 90 minutes. If you have 90 minutes and you're training 3 days a week, you have 4.5 hours with these players. And every single moment, I think every single minute is valuable. And so if you're wasting 5 minutes to go get a drink, come back, or to reset your drills, or to set up a new drill, then you're wasting 45 minutes a week potentially or more. So you have to be very sharp in your transitions. So this is a way, if I were the director of a club right now, I would make this be the standard for most of the trainings, where you go from a pre-training to a warm-up. Quickly transition, and it depends. It might be in winter, you skip these water breaks. But if you're in Sacramento in the summer and it's 105 degrees, you're taking water breaks. Then you train with exercise 1. Then you have your quick transition, jog over, get water, or bring their water close to the sideline. And then you do your next drill, your next exercise. And generally, this is the planning that I would have. You don't always have time as a coach for the pre or post training, but you sometimes might. So you might only, my first year with the Republic, I always, the post-training was one of the times I always pre-training, let them know exactly what we're going to work on, exactly what we wanted to improve. And post-training, I always reevaluated it. I had our sports performance guy do a cool down, and I used it for banter. I love to just stand around and make jokes, and I would gradually relax and make it a time that they enjoyed being around. So that's the planning that I would have. Here is games, and you can go into all sorts of detail. If you really think at the highest level, you have to eliminate any questions, and you have to work at the highest level detail. For instance, just to give an example, with the Sac Republic first team, we found that by walking off the field all the way to the locker room, we already lost 3 to 4 minutes. So then if you had to walk out, 8 minutes gone halftime. So you had such a small window, and we learned this from Franz Hook years ago, that you literally, we'd start off saying, hey, what do you guys think? And I know with youth players as well, I always start, what do you think? And they'll be all over the place. Oh, we're doing well. Oh, and so then we'd say, okay, no, how are we in ball? How are we overall? How's the mentality? Mentality was good. Okay. How are we in ball possession? And then you go through, how are we in transition to defense, transition to offense? But we try and structure our halftime talks. And I've seen, like I watched, I'm not sure of Albertine's wife's name, but I watched her give a really good halftime talk along those lines that I thought was great. At the same, I actually watched 4 halftime talks at an NPL showcase, and all of them gave great insight. But I thought the structure of 3 of them wasn't great. And if they were more structured, they could have achieved more. So
Erin Montoya for the record.
Erin, okay. Well, she was really sharp in her use of the halftime. Pre-game, how do you want your kids to show up? What do you? For us, I knew from academy games, I scouted a bunch for U.S. Soccer, and it always bothered me that teams that if the 19s were playing, the 17s came and sat behind them on the field. And so we made sure that the field, no one came into the grass part of the stadium until it was their time, unless they needed to see the trainer. But they were very aware of what their demeanor and what the environment we wanted pre-game. Then you have your warm-up, and this warm-up could be flexible. If there are times where in the winter in Sonoma County, when we had 1 turf field, if I got a warm-up of a half an hour, I would change it. I would do a tactical training, because I knew I didn't have a half a field all week. So I would use my warm-up. There was a time with Santa Rosa United where I went through a phase where I did a technical training in every warm-up. I treated my warm-up like a training module of 35, 40 minutes. I went longer than I normally would in order to maximize their development at the time. And I didn't care about the results because we were playing up an age group at the time. And I had a really good team, so we could beat most of the teams playing up anyway. But you have your warm-up, and this is an area that I see a lot of people training too long or going too long, and it depends on the aim. If you want to win a match, then you need to be very sharp with your warm-up. If you are trying to achieve something else during that time, then you achieve something else. Then have them get water, then you bring them back in, and a big thing I think of is ignite. Like for me, it's ignite the players to go out and if I would even use, if I think people aren't sharp enough, I'll tell them the warm-up is already the game. And if I see someone unprepared, I'm going to make a sub before the game starts. And so just find ways to ratchet up the intensity and to help them learn how to prepare themselves to get those butterflies going so that they're ready for the game at the time. Then you have the halves, and you focus on what you want to decide on in the game. It could be, it depends on the competition. I watched one of our board of directors coach a state cup game, and I'd seen him coach otherwise, and he coached very differently. And he told me afterwards, his club places value on state cup. He was in a state cup final, so he coached differently than he would in a league game. And so that's absolutely, he had the aim, and the game, the warm up, the game, the approach, everything was based on the aim of that day and the aim of that competition. And then, of course, you look at the time frame and you look at age groups. If you're at a tournament, obviously, you can't do all of this. You might be warming up on the sideline. But you can still, as a club, plan and know this beforehand so you're not surprised. And you know, the players know, okay, if we can only run on the sideline, we only get 10 minutes on the field, then we're going to make sure our touch is sharp, our physically we're sharp, mentally we're ready, and we're going to jump in and do something tactical or something to goal immediately. Halftime, again, I went through this, how you approach a halftime. And I'm not saying this is the way, but it's a good way of doing it, depending on the time you have. And then again, reignite them.
Benjamin, there's a question particularly about that. Someone's asking, what are the 4 moments you ask about at halftime?
When you have the ball, you lose the ball. So transition defense, transition to offense, and defending and attacking. So when we have the ball, when we lose it, when they have the ball, when we win it, and then we have the ball again. So I ask them on how are we in transition? Oh, we're a little bit slow. We're trying to press and win the ball back immediately, but we're not sharp in our defensive transition. And it depends on the age. With youngest kids, you might just say, okay, when we get the ball, how are we? We're pretty good. What do we want to do? We want to make the field big. So you might be, obviously it depends on the age and the level.
And Todd Sullivan just typed in there, what about the pre-game talk? I assume that your pre-game talk sets the objectives for the halftime?
Yes. Yeah, not halftime, it depends, but yes. If we're focused on build up and say, okay, this game is all or possession, for instance, then yeah, that would be probably the primary focus. But absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so now I'm just going to go. This is the final part, and then we'll just have some conversation. What time is it? How am I doing? Oh, okay. So I'm just going to go through and show examples of planning. And these aren't all my own. These are some are from NorCal Premier. This is one I've showed. This is just an annual thing. This is a tool. Okay, so this is a 6-week plan, and you can see all these things dragged down, and we'll share this with you, and you can adapt these. It's really cool because these are the fundamental principles that feed into it. But here's a simple 6-week plan, and you can just see. And so if you train twice a week, you can just require the coaches, say, hey, do this twice a week. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, fill out your, or if you're training Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, fill this out. It's a great practice for them, and it makes them, everyone work a little bit more seriously. And the last club that I was technical director, well, previous Republic, I was an age group director, or I forget what Paul Buckle called it, lead phase coach. But with Sonoma County Alliance years ago, I took the Monday and made it with the staff, we made it individual development. So a lot of it was individual skills, 1v1 and 4v4 to goal, to the line, what have you, but everything focused on individual skill development and 1v1s. Tuesdays was passing, receiving, possession, and playing, small-sided. And then Thursdays we gave to them and said, okay, that's your training to work according to what you want to prepare from the last weekend and for the next weekend. So we only planned 2 of the days a week. And then we had periods where we went off of it due to field space or what have you, but it was something so simple as that. So that's one example right there. So here's another example. And I don't know what they are till I open them up. Okay, here's a NorCal planning tool that we'll share with everyone if you want it. And this is something that I think Greg Rubendahl, Paulo, my brother, and a few others developed. But it goes through like a 2 times 6 week cycle. And you can just see, this gives you an overview. And this would be something that you just have everyone do. Very helpful. And then it went into more detail where you actually come in and you can put in everything in here that you're going to, the times, what have you. So this is another overview, but it gets even deeper, where now you start to go in, and this is the NorCal, the language we're using so far in our curriculum. And so you can literally go on here and put in what you want to do. So again, this is depending on your club and on what you can demand of your coaches. This would be a planning tool that you can feel free to use, to modify, to adapt, which I've done. I've taken some of these and done my own thing. And then over here you have, I mean, it just keeps going for different age groups. And you can see, and then at the very end, I believe you can actually, you can edit, like these are the, you can change all the zones or change all the things inside. All of these you can change back there. So again, if you want this, all these documents, this will be a plan that we'll share with everyone. Okay, so then here's Fiorentina. And this is Paulo Bonomo used the Fiorentina example, and it should load here. And so this is a very, Fiorentina presented a very interesting example to us because the professor was never able to watch all the teams train because they were so spread out. Whereas if you go to Barca, they can go walk around and watch every team train. It's very easy to track what they're doing. And it's very easy because they have like 6 drills that they do. That's a joke. But they, or 6 areas they work. But here's Fiorentina, and you can actually change these. And so this will give you an idea of what is the club, the coaches are working on. So you can change all these areas and have an idea. I think it would be interesting as a director to know, does a coach ever work on heading, for instance, or how much do they work on dribbling 1v1s? Because so many, or whatever, it'd be interesting to see whatever they do. And then here's a way of breaking down even more. Paulo did this when Fiorentina gave us money to run the IDP. When we had our partnership with them, this is the way Paulo turned in to the professor an overview of what we're doing, and went all the way down to the daily training plan. So this is a pretty simple, complex but simple way of doing things. Okay, next is that I already went into this a little bit with tactical periodization. That was my starting point. This is where I went with it, but now I just want to show you some of the, so here's the compass, so to speak, for me. And you can see underneath working on the things I worked on. So I had, at first I had to have this top part up in order to guide me in my planning. And then once, this is something I was going to put in, but they said it was blurry earlier, but this gives you an idea of when you're working from a tactical periodization of the size of the field and the number of players you should be using. So we'll post this as a PDF so you can see it, but you can see how often you need to use a whole field. And it's basically just in games and right there on Thursday in this case. So the standard weekly patterns, this is more for the physical side with the recovery strength, what you work on, and then tactically the principles. So a principle is like the principle of attacking. We have the ball. A sub principle is attacking from the width, and a sub principle was 1v1 with wing play, for instance. Here's another week. Okay, now here is the way the first team worked. We worked last year, but we had a guy that filled in a lot of this, our sports performance director. And this is, we did every Sunday, we filled this out. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to share this. I'll ask Simon Elliott. But this is what we filled out. And then from this, we drew our drills. Here's an example of a weekly plan. This is a document I've been working on, sort of taking everything and saying, okay, if I was going to run a club now, a club, just a normal competitive, NPL sort of club, how would I make or request the coach's work? And I would probably lead a conversation that would then have them do something like this. which is I would like to know them to think about what they're doing physically on that day. And if it's a different age group, so this is for 14 boys. So, and I just realized I should have articular mobility, stretching in there because it becomes important at that age. And then the technical side that I'd like to know what they're working on. I would use Paulo's document where the percentages would be tied up. So I'd have a pie graph, and eventually I will. And then individual tactical, small group or line tactical, team tactical. And then I like to know if you're playing possession or positional game, which are different. Possession is more free flowing and positional game is more of a tactical in your position. And then how much of a tactical game and what is their aim of their tactical game. So this would probably be what I would use right now. And then here's, I think I already showed this, the Republic Simple one that we did at the end. Okay, here's, this might already have shown this. Whoops. I'm not going to do that. All right, and I just showed this. So let's see, this might be the Republic Simple. Yeah, so those are the examples that I have of planning. And so again, my approach to this would be don't let perfect get in the way of starting. And that's an Amazon, the guy Bezos, if you look online for one of his presentations, he basically says, don't let perfect get in the way of doing something. And so the thing that we learned, or I took away from the La Liga course, was their clubs, the one that Ronaldo, the original phenomenon, owns. They're just starting right now. They're just starting their game model, their methodology, and they're a major Valladolid. They're a major club, but they have over the years just never had a way of working. And so the biggest thing to do is just to start and put down the work areas that you might need. And then I'm a collaborative person, so I like collaboration. I like a lot of different viewpoints, but I also know that eventually the buck stops somewhere. So eventually you have to say, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. But if you get everyone to work and you develop a plan for developing all these areas, then you all of a sudden you're going to find yourself in a few years with all these things. But this doesn't get into methodology. And so for game model, in my opinion, is easy. A lot of people have it, but I don't have. My methodology is primarily in my head. And so I've just started to go through. I'm trying to get all my Republic drills, the ones I drew up there, transferred over into the NorCal, but I'm going to start to put all my drills in order because I have a way of working in myself, but I can't yet share it in the manner I would like to. So that's one of my goals over the next year or two, is to develop my methodology to the point that I can share it with someone and it's very clear. Game model, no problem. Planning, no problem. Some of these areas, no problem. But my vision on soccer, no problem. But a methodology, the day-to-day, week-to-week, is an area that I think need work.
So Benjamin, a nice segue into a question from Fernando Deza. Are these planned periodizations based on your club's methodology, your own coaching philosophy, or also based on the group of the players? Is there a most efficient one? So
it's certainly based on, it depends where I've worked, but clearly, if you go into the way I started with Sac Republic was myself saying, this is the way I want to work. But by the end, as we worked together, it became a club methodology or club planning. So with national teams, there was a staff of 5 people that we met weeks out and planned. So it depends. It depends. It all reflects because if you don't plan, for instance, the players that came to Sac Republic in year 1, I could tell which club they came from, and they all added something. And I didn't argue against a Republic curriculum for the Big Six or whatever, because I thought the strength was actually the diversity. I know from less organized clubs, you get more creative players. So because they're from clubs that just play a lot, you get more creative players, but they may not necessarily be as sharp technically. Or so you do, if you do a lot of dribbling, if you do a lot of like, we were just at Barcelona for 4 days, Ian Mork and I. The football of the U19s was almost boring because they do so much passing and receiving and so much positional play. There was no creativity in the bunch. And they recognize it as a club right now. The difference between being a player that's rated 8, you know, like the professional player, and something special is the street. And so you have to read your player pool. I mean, I've coached teams that I think that's the highest level, is to read the individual player and your team, and you adjust and you do your plan on the fly. Not on the fly, because you have to have planning on the technical side. So, but you have, yeah.
Sorry, a few other questions. How much longer, Benjamin?
I'm done.
Okay, I've got probably 4 more questions.
Okay.
I think could help quite a few people. At what age, does this matter? What age do you start to build a periodization plan for teams?
I mean, you could do it from the beginning. So if you think about what an under 9 player should learn, and I actually probably would build a plan that ensured that coaches don't coach too much in the game day, or have enough open coaching where the players are able to express themselves and do a lot of individual. If I was in charge of an under 9, 10, 11, based on what I've seen in the last 3 months since I've been let go from the Republic, I would do a lot of individual. I see very few players that are able to break lines and dribble. So I would have early on a heavy emphasis on individual skills, 1v1 dribbling. And then I might say, if we train twice a week, 1 day a week is this curriculum. Second day, you can do something on your own. If you're 3 days a week, I might take 2 and give them 1. But I would have, ideally, the coaches or the coaching directors are master coaches who have experience at all levels. And so they're able to help develop these. So you could do it at any age.
Okay, we'll go 2 more questions. Glenn, the famous Glenn Van, do you create your team plan before or after you get your schedule?
Team plan before or after I get my schedule? What you mean, my league schedule from US Soccer?
I'm guessing I could maybe Glenn we could come back to that one if Glenn wants to.
Yeah, have him clarify.
Okay. And then when do you typically announce your starting lineup at youth level, at the youth level? From Nate Baldwin?
It depends on the depends on the level. It depends on the team. With the Republic, I'd announce it in the locker room or in the classroom. We fortunately have the ability, or in the hotel room. But it depends. I would sometimes, if I thought I was at a tournament and my team was flat, I tell them I'm not going to decide the lineup till I see who's ready. So there's all the tricks of the trade and the tools that you use and the Fingerspitzgefühl. But I mean, you could as a club decide when you want to do it and give some leeway. But people do it all over the place. Pep at times has announced it in the locker room. And there's some professionals. We had this discussion with Todd Dunavant and Simon Elliott about when they would do it. And players like to know in advance. But if player knows on a Friday, I would never tell someone, a youth player, during the week, because then especially older players might go out. And so it's also why I like to train with older teams on a Friday night, because I knew where the kids were. They were with me.
Yeah.
So those are filling things.
Maybe there's a really good question here that might be a nice one just to end with. Matthias Menzies said, best practices for achieving staff buy-in in order to work the club's methodology or game model. So many coaches coming from different pedagogical backgrounds.
Yeah. Ideally, long-term, somebody develops something that is the club. So for example, I can think of, there's a few clubs that have a certain style of play, and if you're not willing to coach that, then you don't get hired there. Reality is a lot of us are just scrambling to fill coaching staffs and hire good people. So I'm a firm believer in involving everyone, even the teams. When I coach a team, I actually involve them in the disciplinary and the rules around the team to get them to buy into it. And so in the end, they're punishing themselves because they've chosen what the punishment might be for somebody showing up late or someone. So I'm a huge fan of the collaborative approach. And you say, okay, we develop this together. So these are our agreements. And then if someone's not following, you say, why aren't you following it? You agreed to it and you helped develop this. And if they have a good reason why not, then you listen to them and say, okay, this is something that we should consider changing. So I'm a huge fan of the collaborative approach, but led already. Most of the time I have something in mind before I enter that.
Okay, great. So at this point, I'm going to, Benjamin, I'll let you close, closing words after just some housekeeping things. Thanks to everyone for the Q&A, the questions. Some great questions came in. We couldn't get to all of them. I know Benjamin will make yourself available to answer questions perhaps you were itching to ask or you couldn't get in. This, as I say, was recorded. It will be made available, as will the templates, the periodization planning templates. I would thank you again. 300 people on NorCal's first coach education webinar. It's probably going to be the way of the world for the next few months. We appreciate your time and I'm coming on. And closing words to Benjamin. Thanks again for your professionalism during this call. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Hey, everyone. Again, I think the main thing is to think it's so simple, and we'll share these tools with you, but at the very least have an annual plan. And I think it should be standard, like any NPL club, you should at least have a weekly plan. And even if you make decision to coach game to game and more tactical periodization, find a way to plan the development of the individual and the team. So that's it. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you. I'll end the meeting now. Take care. Be safe.
Adios. Sayonara.